Welcome back to Built on Blues. Today we are going to look into the future of the trade. Literally, we're talking about printing concrete. I've got Justin D'Angelo from Printera 3D down in Florida on the line. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I want to jump right into the deep end. 3D printing is something we associate with, plastic trinkets, but you're doing it with concrete. How did this start for you? Can you take us back to the beginning where the spark was, I'm going to 3D print concrete?
Sure. So, as you kind of introed, right, most people know 3D printing from the plastic trinkets and desktop printing. And that's actually where it started for me as well. So, I was an enthusiast in 3D printing with like PLA and, just other materials that you could run on a regular desktop machine. And being a member of that community, I saw an article about a company that was 3D printing a house, and it was very intriguing. So I just kind of dove in further into that, and it culminated with me taking a vacation day and going and observing, and came away from that day as a believer. So I was like, wow, this is really going to shape construction. I didn't have a construction background. I had an IT background, but I've always been very hands-on with like home projects and renovations and things, and I've done a couple flips. So I was like, you know what? I want to see if I can break into this industry and do things on a smaller scale than houses, but still leveraging the same technology to do large kind of architectural scale items. So that's where
Yeah.
I started, and the little bit I'll add to that is, it wasn't a overnight thing. I started actually kind of as a moonlighting thing from my previous job, and I had a smaller robot, and I was working in my garage on nights and weekends, and just trying to get the technology down and see if it actually could be a business.
Yeah, of course. How would you go into like the mindset that you had doing that? It's people think that you can just, start a business and, it be super successful. But like you said, you were working and then on the side, you were pretty much spending every single weekend working towards this. You even took time off, like you said, a vacation day to go see this thing happen. And this is what almost like sparked that in you. How would you say your mindset was going into this?
So I was, I was like enamored by the technology at first, right? So that, I was on the hype train fully, right? Like just seeing how this could be a disruptor. I would have to recommend at least for if you're saying how do people kind of get into it? I was in a fortunate situation, right? That I had another job and I could kind of segment and split my time to work on it in nights and weekends to build up the confidence that it would be a real solution before going all in with an investment and into the facility that we're in now. But that's where it started, right? With that safety net and putting in the extra time, the nights and the weekends to make sure that I had something that could really work. And then once it did, right, and I was able to say, hey, look, I've got this concept. We've printed some real things. You raise the necessary money to scale it up to what it needs to be a viable production business. And at that point, it's not just my time and money on the line, it's other people's. So there's
Hmm.
no more nights and weekends, right? Like then you really got to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, right? And
Yeah.
jump in and make it your full-time focus. So that was kind of the happened. Like if I had to give you a timeline, it was about 8 months later, right? From the
Yeah.
time that I actually had a small printer in my garage to being able to, give my full-time attention to it.
Yeah, I would still say that's a pretty big leap of faith, though, for sure. The construction industry, I would say, can be pretty set in its ways, with like blue collar workers, it's always like the bosses are very, like you said, set in their ways. When you first started Printera 3D off the ground, what were the major walls I would say you hit? Like, was it technology failing, or were people looking at you being like, why do you have this thing set up in your garage? Like, what's going on here?
There's a couple things. So to start with, at like just a very rudimentary level, it was that people still didn't even understand 3D printing, let alone construction scale. So the education curve for our potential clients was significant, right? Where you have to say, hey, you're used to maybe casting something out of concrete. 3D printing is gonna create an object the same way. It's just a different approach. And I can't tell you how many times in just cold calling or loose introductions, right, to people where we say, oh, we're 3D printing concrete, and they think that we're basically stamping concrete, right, or
Yeah.
printing on concrete, right? So then you have to, show some video or some images, right, and that helps bring the whole thing together. And to compound on that, when you start your company like this, and a lot of it's based on your track record, right? So you're coming to them and say, hey, I've got this awesome technology, and here's the things we can do with it, but you don't have a portfolio, right, of completed projects and real good case studies to point to. It's a challenge, right? So you're looking for the
Hmm.
partner that is really tech enthusiastic and is willing to take a risk on something, and you work your way up from kind of the smaller projects into some of the bigger stuff that we're looking at now. And looking forward, right, we've got bigger and bigger projects kind of coming into us every month, and that's just the growth curve of getting into this business, right? And I have to believe a lot of that is based on the track record that we now have that you don't start with. So
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The first product is always the hardest one to sell. Like you said, you need a little bit of reference and that track where you're like, hey, like I've built this before, but now you have to kind of work your way through the market and find someone who's like almost as enthusiastic with you. Be like, hey, like you have to explain them, you have to be proud of your product and being like, hey, like I have this crazy thing, like I can print pretty much whatever you can imagine in concrete almost, right? It's still, I feel like people have a hard time still finding that human connection in business where it's like, hey, like let's work on this together instead of being like, hey, I'm just gonna sell you this. Like this is what I have and like this is what I can do for you rather than be like, hey, like let's work on this together. I
totally.
know a lot of our listeners are probably trying to figure out how exactly does it work. Do you mind breaking down a little bit of the chemistry and the science behind it?
Sure. So, I mean, at its real fundamental level, it's the same as your desktop 3D printing. It's just at a greater scale and with a more finicky material, right? So we literally are bringing our concrete in a dry powder form in big sacks, and we load it up into a silo that sits above what is also essentially a modified shotcrete pump that they would use to blast concrete on like pools or mining walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead for us it's pumping our printable concrete mix. So that dry material is going down into that mixer. It's hydrating at a very specific ratio of water to material. It's pumping, and then instead of the nozzle being held by a person blasting a pool wall, it's held by a robot. And the robot is loaded with a program, right, that tells it exactly what toolpath to follow to create an object, right? So it's deposing that material layer by layer until you have an object. In our special case, kind of the Printera specialty or the Printera difference is the quality of our extrusion and the objects that we're able to make are much more vast than the in the field printers because for one reason, we're injecting a liquid accelerant into our nozzle right at the point of extrusion. And that's a controllable variable. So we can be really potent with that injection and then get the
Mm-hmm.
concrete to set, in 30 seconds to a minute, or we can pull it way off and just let the concrete do its thing naturally. But as you can imagine, that lets us do things with very short layer times, like a skinny little column, right? Where, you're only dealing in 1 to 2 seconds per layer versus maybe a house wall where you have a minute or two a layer, or like the biggest layer time thing we did was an artificial reef where there were a ton of squiggles and, we pull off on the accelerant in that case to let the concrete do its thing a little more naturally than the accelerant. So that's kind of the special thing that's happening right on our end, right? If you broke it
Mm-hmm.
down to its purest form, and then you have an object, and then the whole next part of the equation, right, is and the question that we get all the time is then how does it get transported? How does it get installed, right? And that's kind of the next element of dealing with big, heavy concrete things, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's another cost and it's another problem that, a problem that needs a solution. I think it's also really smart that you guys are doing it in a controlled environment though. I know when I did concrete, you always have to check the forecast to make sure that you can pour on this day. And I like the controlled variable that you have with the accelerant. I know when you add accelerant in the concrete mixer before it leaves that site when it comes to your site, you don't know how quickly it's going to set and, you got to work on it fast or sometimes it's taking forever to set. And there's a lot of uncontrolled variables there where you guys are doing the best way where you have everything you in that scenario where it is controlled.
And that's a direct connection by the way back to the regular printing, right? Like if you think about your desktop printing, you want to eliminate as many variables as you can from the equation to get a
Hmm.
consistent result. So the variable of the material, the variable of the environment, right? Humidity, temperature, all those things that if controlled generates a higher quality end product.
Yeah. So I would say you guys definitely got the printing tech sorted. What other tools are you guys using to actually run your guys' operations? How are you like keeping the business side of the scheduling, the project management streamlined so it's keeps up to speed with the printer?
Sure. So there's a couple elements that we can touch on, right? So one that I think is interesting, at least as it pertains to the 3D printing, is also the design side of the field. So sometimes people come to us with models, but more often than not, we're doing the design and helping them convert an object. So in that, we have some internally developed software that we built on Rhino Grasshopper to to build our geometries and slice them for the robot. And the reason I bring this up is not only just because of the insight into the design, but that's also a direct nod into kind of how we run our operations, because that slicer that we built will tell us exactly how long something's going to take to produce. It'll tell us how much material is being consumed in that object. It'll tell us an approximate weight of the object when it's done. So those things influence our operational flow. And then kind of behind the scenes, right? We're a very small, lean startup at the moment, so we're not running like an ERP system today, right? It's just not necessary in the in the scheme of our operations. It might be as we grow,
Hmm.
but then it's just kind of other back of the house elements, right? I mean, like, bookkeeping, like we're like probably half the other companies in the world on QuickBooks. And then we're using, some marketing automations and things like, like kind of like a version of MailChimp, right? And,
Yeah.
we're tracking some things in a CRM, but it's all very like high level and pretty lean for just a small several person startup.
Yeah.
And then obviously, I think the big one that everyone wants to talk about today, right, is AI and how do you implement that and where we're using it. And that has a kind of a multi-pronged element for us, right? It's in our marketing materials. It's in kind of our day to day and helping keep track of tasks. And we just had to do a website audit this morning, right, where it takes a look at our website and gives some suggestions. And then there's also space for it on the floor in production, which we haven't implemented yet, but we have some ideas about.
Yeah, of course. I feel like everyone should be kind of getting more into AI with just the helping of the streamline of the process, even as simple as a task as like knowing what you're going to do every day, or you send it to your website and be like, hey, like what on my website can help, bring people in to educate them or, help buy the products essentially. As a founder in the high tech space, how do you deal with the noise of all of these AI things coming at you though? Because I'm sure you're getting them now. I know I have, especially with like just on my Instagram ads or on social media where it's like, hey, I got this AI thing, I got this AI thing, I got this AI thing that can help you. How would you deal with that noise, like blocking out the things that are bad that aren't going to help you versus the things that, that will actually help you?
So there's a couple things that I consider. So one, first of all, it helps that I'm kind of a tech nerd to start with. So
Hmm.
I like to personally stay up to date and apprised of anything kind of in the emerging tech space. So that's inclusive of different GPTs, right? AI solutions in construction automation and manufacturing environment stuff, but also just like on the consumer side, right? Consumer electronics and hardware and all that stuff. So one is just having a peripheral understanding of like what's happening in the market, and that's easy to do because of my personal interest. And then secondly is I don't often even really acknowledge many of the cold sale stuff that's coming in, right? Like staying abreast of the industry lets me say, okay, I understand what solutions for the most part are on the market, and then if I find a hole in our recognize that we might need something, then I can kind of go out and target look for it, right? And
Hmm.
the noise that's hitting, right? It kind of bounces off, right? And
Hmm.
I consume the interesting media, right? Like who doesn't like to see a really cool video that AI generated or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
in the context of like looking at things and business and where it's going to help, um, I will seek the tool rather than spend a lot of time consuming the marketing material that's hitting me, right,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
given
Yeah,
day.
of course. I want to move on to looking ahead into the future. I want to talk about where this train's going with 3D printing. What are your big goals with Printera 3D into 2026? Are we moving from sculptures to full scaling like housing? Like what's the dream scenario?
So for Printera is it's more than just myself, right? From a founding standpoint. So I have a couple business partners, Justin and Alex, who both came from an architecture background, and they were integrated into the first 3D printed house in Florida. And even personally, I've had some involvement in structures. Personal viewpoint today is that structures are not quite there yet for 3D printing, and that's why we focus more on the landscape and architectural features. I think
Hmm.
that market is going to evolve and continue to become more compelling. There's definitely a lot of use cases where it's really a compelling option. Like if you want a fireproof structure or a hurricane proof structure, I've even seen one company that made 3D printed structure that was designed to mitigate the damage from floods, right, and
Hmm.
fast rising water. So there's definitely some specialty areas where that's applicable today, and people are willing to pay the premium for it. But because of where we were in the time frame of this industry and starting, we've kind of really niched down at this point and said, We think that the custom bespoke architectural and landscape elements that give personality to a big project is where we're going to focus. So, our biggest project to today is in 25 Water Street in Manhattan. It's a conversion from what used to be Chase Manhattan's corporate office to one of the country's largest residential conversion. It's a really cool apartment complex.
Yeah.
And when you first go into that space now, like you walk into the lobby and there's a 60-foot long bench that's very organic and sweeping, and it's got integrated planters in it. It segments the stairs from the ADA ramp. Like it adds a personality to the space, and it's encompassing of the space, right? It's large. So it's something that's really giving like a sense of permanence and like uniqueness to that specific environment. And I see more and more projects that are going to incorporate stuff like that. So I don't want to say that Printera is going to go do houses or exclude us from saying that we may never, because who knows, maybe we will, but our focus
Yeah.
really today is in those bespoke custom features that give the accent and the personality to spaces today. And the double benefit is that that's immediately applicable today, right? It's price competitive. There's advantages in terms of installation, the resonance of it, and the permanence, right? With concrete,
Hmm.
all those things make it a compelling argument today. And I don't have to try and sell it as hard, right, against what some competing options are.
Yeah,
And I think that
exactly.
I think that that's what our future looks like, right? And then maybe just the scale of those projects continues to increase and get bigger.
Yeah, I'm for sure you guys definitely have a uniqueness to the that you bring to the table for sure. And like you said, you don't have to worry about like fighting against someone else to sell your guys' product. Like you said, you guys are doing something fascinating, and I'm sure you can get a lot of people behind on what you're doing. I always like to ask this one question to every business owner that I talk to. If you had a magic wand that, could snap and make one problem disappear, whether it be your supply chain or, like the transportation, like you mentioned before, admin headaches, lead flow, what would you want to go away?
It's a good question. I've got a bit of a ridiculous answer that I think will be fun. I wish I could make the concrete stuff weigh nothing. At least for the
Make
duration
it
of
hollow
our
somehow.
manufacturing it. Yeah, right. Like use like anti-gravity device or something. Because I often
Yeah.
question myself, what was I thinking with concrete as the material we want to work with? Right.
Yeah,
It's
because it's
it's
gonna be some
brittle. It's
heavy to
hard to
move.
transport. It's expensive to move.
Yeah.
Those cons also have an associated pro, right? So
Hmm.
you talk about like the stuff that goes into site lasting forever, and no one's going to steal it because they literally can't, right? And
Yeah.
the resistance to storms and all that stuff like that's all pro. Man, I'll tell you what, yesterday I was directly involved with delivering an art piece that consisted of some 3D printed chickens that were 4.5 feet tall, and they all ended up weighing about 400 pounds a piece, and
Holy.
that's exhausting, right? It's
Yeah.
exhausting.
Exhausting to move.
So so that's a silly answer. But yeah, I mean there's any number of things, right? I mean we're dealing with material logistics that's become a lot easier in the last 6 months for us than it was if you asked me that same question last year. I wish that even still our customer base, like architects and landscape architects, were knowledgeable and apprised of this being a solution, right? Like I can
Hmm.
only do so many interfaces and lunch and learns and expos. There's still so many people that I meet that don't even know we exist or that this is an option. So Magic Wand would be pretty cool. If you have one, let me
Yeah.
know.
I will. I will. This has been fascinating. I don't want to take too much of your time, but before you go, I want to ask one more question. I want to speak to the guy out there who has that crazy idea. Maybe it's a farmer or an HVAC tech with a new concept, but he's terrified to start. What advice would you give that person that is standing on the edge but having a hard time taking that first step?
Yeah. So I would say, just drawing from direct personal experience, don't get hung up on the planning phase of trying to jump into your idea, right? At a certain point, there's a call to act. And no matter when you do, right, you're never going to be fully ready, right? There's always a surprise or learning element. The sooner you can get to market and actually act on your idea, the better, right? In terms of making sure that you're out there before other people with similar kind of idea. So don't get hung up on needing to get everything perfect before you launch and start, right? Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't have a plan in place or do some of the legwork, right? But just recognize that there's never a perfect time unless you're like super lucky by some chance. You just have to kind of take the step, right, the leap of faith and do it, and things will tend to work out because at that point, right, if you're putting your all into it and it calls for all of your attention, right, then you're going to do what you got to do to make it work. So that's kind of the
No,
retrospect idea that, right?
yeah, I l- I love that. That's some awesome stuff, Justin. I really appreciate you saying that because I know that that speaks to me too. And jumping in full throttle and going all in on something. When it calls you, you feel like you have that instinct and Um, like I said, thank you again. Where can people find you if they want to take a look at these 3D printing concrete sculptures that you've made? What's the best way to contact you or see your product?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, so we're super accessible, and I'm personally very open to talking with people and explaining things or just having a conversation about the tech. So you can reach out to me. LinkedIn is a great place to get a hold of me, right? If you search Justin D'Angelo Printera, I'll pop right up. You can contact us via our contact form on our website, printera3d.com. And then additionally, just like to follow along and see our projects and videos and pictures of the kind of stuff that we do. The website's great, but we're also active on all the social channels. So Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok even, right? So you just search Printera 3D and we should come right up.
Awesome. I'll put the link up in the show notes for anyone who's interested. Justin, thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And I hope to do it again sometime.
Of course, yeah. We'll have to do another one in a year or so where we see where you've came from, like the process and everything. And to everyone listening, if you're stuck still running your business on sticky notes while Justin are printing concrete with robots, it might be time to take a look at your system. Keep building, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye now.